Good morning. We're going to talk a little bit about the future of technology. One of the really interesting things that we find happening today is that there are so many things that are changing from a technology perspective that it's really, really hard to convince people to take a step back from the day-to-day things that they're looking at and try to understand what's happening overall. And so I'm lucky enough that my job requires me to spend most of my time trying to figure out not just what are the things that are happening, but why are they happening? Why do we care? What do we need to pay attention to? And what does that mean for the future of where things are going? So today we're going to walk through a little bit about what I view as our 5-year future of how technology is going to change the landscape of companies, people, and honestly, we're really getting to a point where we're talking about the way it's going to change the world. Now, whether most of you realize it or not, we are currently at a turning point in the technology front. We're just about to switch from what we've been terming this digital age that we're currently into. Now, let me give you an example to make this real to understand what I'm talking about. The University of Heidelberg Hospital is currently working with Siemens in order to introduce digital twin technology to their healthcare. Now, essentially what that means is they're trying to go beyond electronic medical records, beyond imaging, to actually create models and representations of every single individual patient in order to use it to better provide healthcare. Now, one particular example is that they're essentially trying to try to figure out if I can actually image a heart, and not just any heart, the heart of the patient who's actually lying on the table right now. Can I make better decisions between how I install a pacemaker? Where do the electrodes go? Where's the optimum solution? Because what's happening is that there are specific moments in time where we have the ability to drastically change the outcomes of what we're doing. And what they're trying to do is trying to figure out that says, how do we use the fact that technology is becoming a part of all of our companies in order to be able to suddenly target these moments? Now, this may feel far off. It may feel like something that somebody's experimenting with now, but it's going to take a long time to implement. But let me put things in context to you. 6 years ago, we started talking about this concept of every business is a digital business. We essentially put our reputation on the line, going into every C-level office who would let us come in to talk to them about the fact that their company was about to become a technology company. Now, I don't care whether you are an agriculture company, a mining company, a products, insurance, you name it. We were trying to push them to realize that a big piece of their future and who they were was to become a technologist. And we were told that's not true. Now, you look 5, 6 years later, in 2018, $1.3 trillion was spent on digital transformation. And more than that, when we did our annual study, what we realized was that over 90% of the senior executives that we talked to believe that digital strategy is fundamentally one of the key inputs to how they are defining their company, how are they defining their strategy, and how they're defining their future. So what we realized as we were looking into it is, okay, so if now I'm looking 5 years out, what does that mean? It meant that we actually had to change the question that we were trying to ask. We went in assuming that what we were trying to do is to figure out what does it mean for a company to become digital and how am I using technology to change the way I work? And what we realized is they're already doing that. And so the question that we were trying to ask now says, how do I take a step back and ask, what does a world fundamentally look like when it's not just Google and Facebook and Amazon pushing technology and pushing change into our lives, but it's every single company, all of the global 2000s, all the companies that you work for. And that's what we're moving towards. And we believe a key piece of this is really this concept of moments. So let me give you another example. GM is currently installing 3D printers into their manufacturing plants. And I don't think anybody's going to be surprised, that 3D printing is something that goes on in a lot of industrial environments. But they're using it differently than we'd expect. It's not about the 3D printers for making cars. They're installing 3D printers to make the tools that make cars. What they've realized is that there are certain moments that cause them more pain and anguish than any others, and that's the moment that their assembly line stops. It happens when you have a recall, it happens when you change parts, it happens when you break tools, and what they've realized is that this moment of change causes everything to stop, it delays everything, and it costs an enormous amount of money. But by putting 3D printers into the plants themselves, what they've done is they've provided exactly the right service to create the right tools that are customized exactly to the problem they're having, and they're able to give them that right away. And it's these moments where they believe that they can fundamentally make a difference. Now, if we unpack that a little bit, what we realize is that this is an extension of the things that we're already doing today. Think about your company, think about what's happening and what you're trying to accomplish as you become more digital savvy, as you're using analytics and mobility and cloud as a part of what you're doing. And a lot of the things that we're doing are fundamentally pushing towards two things. The more data we have means the more that we understand what's going on. And it means the more that we can actually take what used to be generic products, services, and turn them into something personalized. And that can be everything from your music and movie selection, or it can be more interesting things and surprising things. Like right now, Japan's largest retailer, ZOZOTOWN, is doing customized and personalized clothing. So what they do is they send you a spandex suit. So take a moment and imagine your favorite superhero comic and the behind the scenes where they put on their nice green suit that everything gets laid over. And they use that as a way in real time as you're buying clothes to understand exactly who you are, what your measurements are, and to personalize and customize those clothes so that they fit you specifically. Now, the other thing that's happening in the background is, turns out people aren't particularly patient. Is that when we have an option that says I can wait for something or I can have it right now, is we almost always choose to have it right now. And so as we're investing, tons of money, time and effort into making ourselves more agile, and that's from a DevOps perspective, that's from a application development perspective, that's a product, that's your manufacturing plant, that's everything, we're pushing more and more towards this idea that says fundamentally the closer that we can get to on demand as we provide a service, the more flexibility that gives us to react to situations, and the happier and better received our products and services are. The problem is, when you take a step back, all these things make sense. Everybody likes the idea that the application knows where you were, the last time that you used it. They want to make sure that when you have a problem and you call into customer service, that they know what products you have and how it's configured. But the bigger change is the one for when we really start to pull back and realize that if it's not one company doing this, but every company doing this, What we're talking about now is that we are placing our lives, how we work, how we live, how we raise our families into the hands of companies. And on one hand, the possibilities are potentially wonderful. I mean, think about how much easier it is with Uber and Lyft around to get places. Think about how much more comfortable you feel because you have a nanny cam watching your children as the babysitter is there. Think about all of the things you're doing to research medicine, to grow food faster, to feed the hungry. I mean, the possibilities of the things that we're doing as we're shaping our reality around this technology are astounding. But they're also potentially scary because now what we're talking about is not buying products and services. What we're talking about is letting companies into our lives. And this has a couple of interesting and I think relatively profound impacts. So we're going to start with, I'm going to say the corporate impact, which is everybody assumes that you have mastered everything digital. Now, we all know that that's not true, but this is the expectation that's happening in the marketplace, is that when you think about what Google and Amazon are doing, you're no longer competing against just your industry, you're competing about every tech company, every experience that's being put out there, and these are the expectations about how things are done. You're expected to know your customer. You're expected to be able to insights, to understand what they're trying to do, what their goals are, where they are, what they're trying to accomplish. And this is becoming the norm for what we're pushing. And I think that the sad thing is what it means, though, is yes, you need to continue investing in the digital technology, but you're not going to differentiate yourself with it. This is the way the world works, and what we're seeing right now is that the people who are ahead, the people who are really good at this already, are really starting to accelerate what they're doing with that technology versus concentrating on how they're transforming themselves. And then the second thing that comes with this is the fact that if we're really inserting ourselves into people's lives, and don't get me wrong, that's what we're doing, our responsibilities have fundamentally changed. All right, let me start with the easiest example. Social media. We have been listening to social media's companies for 15 years talk about the fact that they are just a platform and that they are not responsible for what's being said on there or for even the truth of the things that are being pushed out there. And if there's anything that the last 2 years has taught me is that that is no longer the case. People no longer believe that, and they're being held to a different standard. But you pull aside the headlines, and what you realize is that as we're pushing into these new things, this is not something that is for the tech companies to worry about. This is something that everybody's worrying about. Let me give you another example. And this hasn't become a problem yet, but is likely going to be a question that somebody's going to answer. And so I'll pick on car companies. Right now, every car that comes off the lot has a GPS sensor in it. Nobody is surprised. We love it as it navigates us to everywhere we want to go. But what we don't realize is that that piece of information that says I can actually track you everywhere you are means that chances are I either know or I could pretty easily find out whether or not you were sick. I know how often you go to the hospital. I know which hospital you go to. I know which clinics you go to. I can easily do a Google search to figure out what that practice is. I understand how many people were in the car at the time, whether you were likely dropping somebody off and then picking them afterwards, or whether it was you. So the question is, if I'm a car manufacturer, what is my responsibility? Now, This isn't a matter of saying that nobody's ever thought about that question before. We have healthcare companies who have been dealing with regulations and huge pieces of that forever. Rather, it's this realization that says the more we integrate ourselves into people's lives, the more we connect ourselves to other companies, other ecosystems, and other people, the more we're, one, going to start doing things that have ramifications in those lives. And then two, because everything really is digital, the more we're actually going to be able to understand what things that companies do, what things that we're doing, and what effect that they have on everybody else. And that's going to start to become the norm for how people think about responsibility, and it's going to become one of our challenges over the next number of years to figure out how we integrate that responsibility into all of our processes, into all of our planning, into all of our practices, into all of our systems, because right now, most of them aren't. All right. So, if those are the big impacts of what's possible, let's talk about how we realistically are going to be doing this. So the first thing that I want to think about is none of this happens if I don't actually understand the people that I'm trying to provide products and services with. And we all know that things are becoming more and more personalized, but I think that the extent of what's possible out there is fundamentally changed. So there's a company called SlicePay. So SlicePay is an Indian financial services company. And what they're doing is they're trying to tap into a fundamentally new market of unbanked people. What they've realized is that there's, I want to say, a third of the population doesn't have a bank account, has never had a loan, and therefore has zero credit history. And the question was, how do you provide services when typically banks and financial institutions judge all of their risk based off of your credit history? And so what they've realized is that right now, because of Uber, because of the cell phones in your pockets, because of your smart homes, because of Alexa, your social networks, and everything else you can think of, you are all leaving a technology identity online. And what they've done is that they've actually taken this technology identity and are using it as a way to try to understand people and create an alternative way to be able to judge, whether or not they do small business loans. And specifically, they're looking at small business loans in tech-related areas, understanding how tightly you are knit to your community, understanding what applications you use, and therefore what technology skills you have, and been able to relatively, because it's all risk, accurately predict how they take a population that got zero financial services and turn it into ones, that people are looking at as a burgeoning new market. Now, I know what you're all thinking. What about privacy? And it is a problem, and it is something that we have to think about, but I want you to start thinking about it differently. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Right now, Amazon and Walmart are currently moving into the grocery delivery business. And not only do they want you to deliver your groceries, they want your key to your house. And Walmart in particular is not just asking for a key to your house, they're asking for permission to open up your fridge and put stuff away. There's a percentage of people in this room who think that is horrifying. I myself cannot wait. But here's the thing, is that privacy is not a line. We keep looking at this as a problem to solve that says if I analyze enough people or I figure out what's going on, that there's this perfect line that says this is what's okay and this is what's not. And the answer is that's not true. I go to my parents' house to drop off groceries, use their key and put it into their fridge, and I'm son of the year. I do that same thing to my neighbor's house and I go to jail. It's not the same thing. And I think this is why we're getting to this point that says if we're moving beyond personalization, we're moving to individualization, it's not about products and services just understanding who you are. That's the first step. But it's also becoming, how do I form a relationship with you to develop the trust? Or how do I understand that that relationship with you is never going to be there? And so therefore, I'm just not going to do anything. And this is the new way we have to start thinking about privacy, is it's not a matter of some data is good and some data is bad and some things we should do or some things we shouldn't. Rather, it's a matter of how do I get to a point where I'm actually having a conversation and relationship with people to understand what they feel is okay with them. And then the last thing we need to do is we have to think about how we fundamentally change our companies to be more agile. There is an Indian company called Biltz. So they are essentially the PepsiCo for Asia, except instead of Pepsi and I think Gatorade, if that's PepsiCo, it's more mango drinks, teas, curries, spices, ginger, things of that standpoint. But what they've done is they've done actually something that's really interesting, is that they have gotten their supply chain and their manufacturing down to a point where they can change the flavors and the mix of all of their drinks in under 2 minutes. And what it's allowed them to do is not view their market of India as here's who likes Coke best, or here's who likes a list of products. Rather, it's allowed them to actually tailor individual drinks for individual areas, going to the point that they have certain areas that like certain varietals of mangoes, so that's the varietals that are used in that soda. They have certain areas that have religious holidays. There was one instance where they have a religious holiday in one city that lasts one day that has one specific drink that they are able to push towards. And it's this push towards agility and how they push the on-demand that's going to become a key component that's going to allow us that power that says, I don't have to predict the whole world in order to understand where I can make a difference, but rather I need to be agile enough that says when I discover those moments, I both have the understanding of the clients, the people, the workforce, to make it valuable, and then I also have the flexibility in my company to actually deliver those services in exactly the right time. All right. So what we did is we walked through 2 of the 5 trends that we're talking about. As we are running down in time, we're not going to be walking through the rest. But I do want to encourage all of you that if you want more details about these trends, you want to dive into the others, just go ahead and either Google Accenture Technology Vision or go to Accenture at www.accenture.com/technology vision. And we have an enormous amount of research, stats, surveys, and any examples and everything else you can think of to start that conversation that we all want to, that says, if I understand what's next, it's going to be able to better equip me today to make the decisions that are going to last, not just in the short term, but in the long term. All right, thank you.